My name is Walter Bregman. I am 74 years old. And 3 months ago, my son stood in my kitchen, looked me in the eye, and told me I was no longer capable of managing my own life. He said it gently. That's the part that still gets me. He said it the way you tell a child that the stove is hot. Calm. Reasonable. Loving, even. And that gentleness was somehow worse than if he had screamed it at me. But before I tell you what happened at that kitchen table, I want you to see where this really started, because it didn't start with a conversation. It started with a cup of coffee. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single one. And if stories about family, dignity, and the quiet cost of being underestimated mean something to you, hit that subscribe button before we go any further, because this channel is built on exactly those stories, and I promise you, this one earns its runtime. Now, let me take you back to the Tuesday morning that started it all. I have gone to the same diner every single morning for 11 years. Rosie's, on the corner of 5th and Miller. Same booth by the window. Same order, black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. The waitress, Denise, has had my ticket memorized since before her daughter was born, and her daughter just started high school. That Tuesday, I reached for my card the way I have 10,000 mornings before. Denise ran it. Waited. Ran it again. It's saying declined, Walt. I laughed. Genuinely laughed, because I assumed it was a bank glitch, one of those Tuesday morning system hiccups that resolves itself by noon. I told her to put it on my tab, which she'd done for me plenty of times before, and I walked out into the cold thinking nothing more of it. I did not think about it again until I got home and tried to check my account online. Locked. Not temporarily unavailable. Locked, with a message asking me to contact my authorized representative for account access. I don't have an authorized representative. I have a son. I called the bank. The young man on the phone was polite, apologetic, and utterly useless, citing privacy protocols and telling me that changes had been made to the account with proper authorization on file. When I asked whose authorization, he paused just long enough for me to understand the answer before he even said the name. Derek. My son. Now, before you assume the worst about him, let me be fair, because fairness matters to me, and it should matter to you too when you judge a family story. Derek is not a villain in some cartoon sense. He is 39 years old. He has 2 kids of his own. He works hard at a job that stresses him more than he lets on. And 6 weeks before that morning at Rosie's, I had, in fact, forgotten to take my blood pressure medication for 2 days in a row. That's it. That's the entire evidence file that led to what happened next. 2 missed pills. Here is what nobody tells you about losing control of your own life: it rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens in inches. It started with Derek helping me set up automatic pill reminders on my phone. Reasonable. Kind, even. Then it was him asking to be added as a secondary contact on my bank account, just in case of emergencies. I said yes, because what loving father doesn't want his son to be able to reach him in a crisis? Then came the paperwork. A form here, a signature there, slipped in between family dinners and grandkid soccer games, always with the same gentle refrain: Dad, this is just a precaution. Dad, this protects you. Dad, I'm only doing this because I love you. I want you to notice something, because it matters for every story like this one. Not once, not one single time, did anyone ask me a direct question about whether I felt capable. Not once did anyone sit across from me and say, Dad, are you okay? Do you feel like you're struggling? If they had asked, I would have told them the truth: I forgot 2 pills because I was up half the night finishing a report for a consulting client, a habit I never gave up even in retirement. Instead, my daughter-in-law Claire began speaking to me slower. Over-enunciating, the way you talk to a tourist who doesn't share your language. My grandson Tyler, 12 years old, started asking his father in front of me whether Grandpa's brain was getting worse, as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away with functioning ears. And then, one frozen bank account and one declined breakfast tab later, I understood. This wasn't a precaution. This was a takeover, dressed up in the language of love. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you've ever watched someone assume the worst about a person they claim to love, without ever once asking, let me know in the comments. I want to know I'm not just telling this story into the void. Here is the part of my life that my son, for all his degrees and all his confidence, has never fully understood. I spent 31 years as a propulsion systems engineer. Not a manager. Not an administrator. An engineer, hands in the actual mathematics of getting machines into the sky and keeping them there. I hold 14 patents. 3 of them, developed decades ago, are still licensed today in cooling systems used far outside the aerospace industry entirely, refrigeration, industrial manufacturing, even some consumer electronics you have probably owned without knowing my name was quietly attached to the technology inside it. Those royalties never stopped. They funded Derek's entire college education without a single loan. They funded the down payment on his first house, a gift I never once brought up at Thanksgiving to make him feel small. And as of the Tuesday my card got declined over a $4 breakfast, those royalties amounted to just over $1.2 million sitting in an account my own son had just quietly frozen because I forgot to take a pill. He didn't know the number. He'd never asked. In his mind, I was a retired guy on a modest pension who needed protecting. In reality, I was a man who had spent 3 decades solving equations that put hardware into orbit, being told by his own child that he could no longer be trusted to buy his own coffee. I did not scream. I did not confront Derek that first week, or even that first month. I want to be very clear with you about this, because it is the part of this story I am proudest of, and it's the part one think most people get wrong when they're hurt. I did not react. I documented. I bought a plain black notebook from the drugstore, the kind with a spiral binding and a cover that doesn't try to impress anyone. And every single day, I wrote down what happened. The date the card was declined. The exact wording the bank representative used on the phone. The date Derek visited and which papers he asked me to sign, and whether I'd actually been given time to read them or whether they were placed in front of me between bites of dinner. So I made an appointment. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted a document that couldn't be argued with. I sat through a full cognitive evaluation with an independent neurologist, unassisted, unprompted, answering every question on my own. The results came back exactly as I expected, sharp, fully oriented, no impairment whatsoever. A 1-page letter, signed and notarized, stating in plain clinical language that I was fully competent to manage my own financial and personal affairs. I want to pause here and tell you something important, because I think it's the heart of this whole story. I never once needed that letter to prove anything to myself. I have always known exactly who I am. I got that letter because I understood something Derek didn't yet understand. That quiet, documented truth is more powerful than any amount of shouting across a dinner table. If you've ever had to prove something to family that you never should have had to prove in the first place, I want you to type the word documented in the comments below. I read every one, and I want to know how many of you have been in this exact chair. I was not alone in this, and I think that matters too, because these stories can start to feel like one man against the world, when really, the world is usually kinder than that if you look for the right people in it. There was Marta Reyes, the branch manager at my bank, who had known me for 9 years and who quietly pulled me aside one afternoon and said, off the record, that something about the paperwork on my account didn't sit right with her, and that she'd flag it for review regardless of what family authorization was on file. There was Diane, my attorney, who didn't just handle the legal mechanics but looked me dead in the eye and said, Walter, nobody gets to decide you're incapable without asking you first. Not even someone who loves you. And there was Harold Kim. Harold and I worked side by side for 11 years on propulsion systems before he retired to Arizona. When I called him, mostly just to vent, he listened for 20 minutes without interrupting, and then he said something I have not stopped thinking about since. Walt, you spent your whole career being underestimated by people who never bothered to read your file first. Don't let it happen at your own kitchen table. These people didn't rescue me. I want to be honest about that, because I don't need rescuing, and neither does anyone watching this who's in a similar position. What they did was simpler and more important. They confirmed, out loud, that what I already knew about myself was true, and that the way my family was treating me was not some acceptable, loving precaution. It was a violation, however well-intentioned. I did not confront Derek in anger. I invited him and Claire to dinner. I chose my own dining room, the same table where Derek had eaten 10,000 meals as a boy, the same table where I'd once helped him with algebra homework he swore he'd never use in real life. I wanted him on familiar ground. I wanted this to feel like family, not like a courtroom, even though, in a sense, it was about to become exactly that. I let them eat first. I let Claire tell me about the kids' school play. I let the evening breathe before I reached beside my chair and placed the black notebook on the table, followed by Diane's letter, followed by a folder of bank statements Marta had helped me compile. Derek's face changed the moment he saw the notebook. Not with anger. With recognition. He understood, instantly, what he was looking at. "Dad, this is for your own good," he said, the same line he'd used 6 weeks earlier, except this time his voice cracked slightly on the word good, as if some part of him already knew it didn't sound the same coming out a second time. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the notebook to the first entry and read him the exact date his forms were filed. I slid the neurologist's letter across the table and let him read it himself, in silence, while Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I told him the number. $1.2 million. Frozen, without a phone call, without a question, based entirely on 2 missed pills that I'd have gladly explained if anyone had simply asked. "You didn't need to protect me from a crisis, Derek," I told him. "You decided I was already in one, and you never once checked whether that was true." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Longer than launch countdowns I sat through in a control room decades ago, hands steady, waiting for ignition. This silence had no countdown. It just sat there, heavy, between a father and a son who suddenly weren't sure how to look at each other. Derek didn't defend himself. That's the part one want you to understand, because I think it's the part that ultimately saved us. He put his face in his hands, right there at the table, in front of his wife, in front of his father, and he didn't perform an apology. He fell apart quietly, the way I had fallen apart quietly for 6 weeks, except his came out all at once instead of in a spiral notebook. "I was scared," he said, finally. "I saw you forget the pills and all I could think about was losing you slowly, the way Mom's father went, and I panicked, and I told myself I was protecting you, but I never once asked you what you wanted. I just decided. I am not going to pretend that sentence fixed everything instantly, because it didn't, and if you've lived through something like this, you know real trust doesn't rebuild itself over one dinner, no matter how honest it is. But it was the first true thing he'd said to me in 6 weeks, and true things, even painful ones, are where rebuilding actually starts." Claire cried too, and admitted she'd gone along with the plan because she was frightened for her own children's sense of stability, frightened of a future none of us could actually predict. Fear, I've learned, disguises itself as control far more often than people realize. We didn't fix it that night. I want to be honest with you about that, because I don't believe in stories that wrap up too cleanly. The accounts were unfrozen within the week, Marta and Diane made sure of that. But the trust took months. Derek started coming by on Sunday afternoons, not to check on me, but simply to sit with me, the way he used to before all this started. He began asking questions instead of making assumptions, actual questions, out loud, the kind that require you to wait for an answer instead of already having decided what the answer will be. 3 months later, he asked if I would consider setting up a standing family meeting, once a season, where we talk openly about health, finances, and what I want for my own future, while I'm still fully capable of saying it myself, instead of family members deciding quietly behind my back. I agreed. Not because I needed the meeting to protect myself, but because I understood, finally, that Derek needed it to learn how to trust me without needing to control me. Tyler, my grandson, asked me last month to help him build a model rocket for a science fair. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and I watched his face light up learning the same physics I spent 31 years applying for a living. His father sat beside us, quiet, watching, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him looking at me the way he used to when he was Tyler's age. Not as a liability. As his father. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight, because I think it matters more than the money, more than the patents, more than any of the details of this particular story. Respect isn't something you extend to people once you've decided they've earned proof of their own competence. Respect is the thing you offer first, by simply asking, before you ever assume. My son loved me the entire time. I never doubted that, not even at the worst of it. But love without asking is just control wearing a kinder word. If there is someone in your life you've quietly started deciding things for, a parent, a grandparent, an older relative, I'd ask you tonight to do one simple thing before you do anything else. Ask them. Just ask them what they want, and then actually listen to the answer. And if you're the one being underestimated tonight, the one whose competence someone else has quietly decided to question without ever checking with you first, I want you to know that your dignity is not up for a vote you weren't invited to. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, drop a comment telling me what part hit you hardest, and subscribe for the next one, because there is always another family, another quiet betrayal, another patient man or woman gathering their own black notebook, waiting for the moment the truth finally gets to speak for itself. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.